the thing for business owners is understanding what they're really good at and understanding that emotion drives business and action is a soft thing. And it's, you can have the best strategy in the world, but if you have, where does pushback come from strategy? It comes from.
Welcome to the Shifan Show. This episode is brought to you by Prosperum Digital. Growing a business in 2026 is tough if you're not using the right systems. Heck, a lot of businesses still run on manual, outdated, stressful processes that pulls focus away from revenue and sales. That's where Prosperum comes in. We install AI automation systems that modernize your business, increasing the revenue and sales without the extra stress or having to hire extra staff members. And we give you back the most important thing as a business owner, which is your time, so you can actually enjoy running your business again. Book a call at www.prosperumdigital.com.au. All right, today I'm very excited to have Rohan Musa, who is a strategic advisor and business coach who works with companies from 2 to 20 million and ready to scale. He's a CPA, grew up in a family business, and built and sold an accounting practice, and then finally has co-founded a global coaching company he ran for 13 years. Over 3 decades, he's helped clients build and exit multi-million-dollar businesses. And one thing I like about him, your style, Rohan's style, is very direct and cuts through the noise and gets to results fast. Welcome, Rohan.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for having me on.
That's good, man. And I think, I forgot how we met, actually. I think we met through our mutual friend, Anthony, the web
We
doc,
did,
was
yeah.
it?
We did. I actually met him at I think it was a networking event that I met him at, and he said, "Oh, you need to get introduced to Ian over in Perth."
Good guy. I actually had him on the podcast. So I think it's my second or third guest in the pod. So good guy.
Uh-huh. Yeah, he's a really nice guy. Very helpful.
Yeah, Anthony. Very helpful, very humble as well. But Rohan, for those who don't know you as well, you've done a lot, and now you do focus more like helping business scale. But beforehand, like, what was your background and like what got you to business as a founder, and what have you done since then, basically?
Yeah, I guess it was in my blood growing up because we grew up in an entrepreneurial family. My father owned a number of businesses, through his career, and the main one he had was a timber and coast pellet manufacturing company, which we still have in the family after 60 years. So that's the one that I knew and got to cut my teeth on. It was interesting because I found myself growing up, even as a kid, spending a lot of time, in the business, just hanging around my dad. And, he was a workaholic, he was always working and that was his life. And I sort of figured if I wanted to hang out with him, then I needed to hang out very young.
Yeah.
And by osmosis, I ended up, I'd spend a lot of time there and I'd follow him around and, and when I was growing up, you sort of see what he does, what he says, how he does it, things that he does. It wasn't until later in my career and you sort of look back and you go, that all these little things that he used to do and talk about, started to fall into place and make sense for me. But I was very fortunate because, I got to learn the numbers side of things at a very young age. So, by the time I was, 16, I understood, profit and loss balance sheet, cash flows.
Yeah, nice.
Production planning, all those sorts of things. So I was very privileged in that sort of, phase to actually get that sort of experience growing up. Yeah. So from there, the love of business sort of got me down to thinking about a career wise. And I thought, well, if you want to run a business, then you need to understand financials. So I, ventured into an accounting degree, commerce degree. And, from there I went into, what I call that typical tax advisory, type of work in accounting. And from that was a good grounding. So one of the things I learned was applying what I'd learned in my, in growing up from our family business into that current role. And that helped me get ahead very, very quickly because I seemed to have knowledge that other people didn't have of my similar age. And that sort of leapfrogged my career. And from there, I ended up, getting into my own accounting and financial advisory practice that I started from scratch, and I built that and then sold that to start the business coaching company here in Australia, which at that stage back in 1999 it was, there was not many business coaching operations around and none that were really at our scales and
Mm.
operating what we called a professional practice, which we built, nationally at day one. That was an exciting time. I built that, had a lot of fun. We exported that back overseas and to many different countries, and then I sold that in 2000 and my share in that in 2013 to start Business Cutthroat, and mostly because at that stage my younger fellow he was 13, and I wanted to be more involved in his development growing up,
Yeah, for sure. Is this
and
James?
yeah, that's right, James. And there was a
Okay.
couple of I think strategic elements inside the business where I felt the business also needed to go in a different direction. And so I felt at that stage it was the right time to step out of the business and do something on my own at a much smaller at a level, of course.
Fair. Fair. Now that's very cool. There's a lot to unpack there. So, because like I think I always hear like because my dad also grew up in a business environment where
Mm,
my grandfather ran a grocery store in the village in Malaysia. So
yes.
my dad understood working hard there. But when you became an accountant, was it because one of those factors where like you enjoyed numbers or you thought it was a good career? Or was it number three where your dad's like, I need an accountant, you go do accounting for me? Is that how it happened?
Well, I got given three choices. I'll give you the real story. The real story was you had three picks. I was either had to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant. I didn't like the sight of blood,
Classic.
so that was never going to work. Didn't get the grades to do law, and quite honestly, I like law, but it wasn't really my favourite choice. Where accounting for me was more in line with business and growing businesses and what I was good at. So
Yeah.
that,
And
that's how I
was
got there.
yeah, because interesting. Because was there ever a time where your dad said, maybe you can take over my business? Or is it more like, son, don't do business. It's very hard. Do something that's a bit more secure. How was the conversation like back then?
Yeah, that's a really good conversation because the work was is quite dangerous. There's saws, nail guns, big band saws, and so it's quite manual. It's quite manual work, as you'd imagine in a factory. And so even though you're running the business, even in a family, you still get involved in the production
Mm,
side of things. And so his sort of view of the world was, well, I've got this business. I really want you to go out and do something professionally, and be more of a white collar worker rather than a blue collar worker, and not being what he would consider a dangerous business versus something that is a bit more, behind the desk and talking with clients and those sorts
sure.
of things. So yeah, that's sort of where it come from. So although in a heartbeat, he'd love to have me in the business. I think there was sort of that other side of it, which I went through going through school, private school, and university, and all the rest of it. He wanted something better, I guess, for his son. So yeah, and I think my brother runs that business, and my father's mother and father passed many years ago, and
Mm,
so he runs that. And we made the conscious choice at that stage that he runs that because I think the two of us running it, we're quite different in approach. And so I think that for the sake of having a great relationship, from two brothers' point of view, I thought it was best that, I do my thing. He was always involved in that business from day one, and that's sort of where we
mm.
kept it. And that's worked successfully for both of us.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that. I like that. And so from you, from your career, from your financial advisory to business coaching and now business cut through, do you have any I guess key takeaways you learned from your dad that applied to to what got you today, to where you are
Yeah, I
today?
think
Sorry.
I think there's a lot. One of the biggest things I learned, was really about respect, and respect with people, and that then be your employees, the people around you. You you show people respect, and you treat them well, and they
Mm,
show up for you, and they treat your business well as in the same time. So he was very big on looking after his staff. He used to cook them breakfast and all sorts of things. And, it
Wow.
was,
Okay.
yeah, and, he very rarely did he have staff turnover. People loved coming to work there. They worked hard. Yeah, often he got in, he probably wasn't the person that you'd say, from a business owner point of view. He used to get in there, roll his sleeves up, and work. Get in there with the workers, and he was always leading from example, not necessarily sitting in the office.
Yeah.
Just working on the business. He would do a bit of that, but he was more the type of character to get in there with the staff and work with them and work alongside them, and lead from that way, and that taught me a lot about leadership. And it also taught me a lot about culture, about
It's cool.
bringing people along for the journey, and working with people. So that was one of the significant lessons that I took, from my time there. And the other one is he was always a very good sales and sort of very good at negotiation and conflict resolution. It was great to see him, cut deals and work with people at different levels. And the beauty, my father, he could work with the CEO right through from the person who worked on the factory floor. He
Wow.
had this
Okay.
he had this really great ability to connect with people at all levels, no matter where they were in the organization. And I think that was another great attribute of his that I really sort of went, that's something that's you want to take forward within your career and your life.
I love that. I thought you going sorry, I thought you were gonna say like, yeah, like work as hard as you can, like nonstop. You share the leadership and cultural aspect, which is it's very cool to hear. I don't know why I
Mm.
went on default like, oh, I was gonna say work hard.
That's the
But
traditional
it's important.
migrant way. But we're always told to
Yeah.
work hard. I always think I've always had a good work ethic. Over the years, sometimes too good, a bit like my father. But I think on the other side of that, one of the things that, when going into business, I sort of said to myself, I don't want to be like my dad. Is from that point of view, like there's so many great attributes that I want to be like him,
Mm.
with certain characteristics. But there's that other side where I said I want to work smarter and not necessarily harder. And so when I went through my career, I was looking at ways to feel like not, I call it cheat the system. In other ways, not take shortcuts or cut corners, but do things more effectively, more efficiently that you could leverage, yourself and what you're doing and create more of an outcome with,
Mm.
with less input. So I was always looking for ways to do that. And I still think that carries on with my clients today. That's one of the fundamental things we talk about leveraging your
Yeah,
time
yeah.
or leveraging your skills, leveraging your leadership. And, that's getting more out from less input. And I think that's something I've always sort of whenever I sort of look at something, that's how I look at it.
Yeah. No, so true actually. I think one thing I know not everybody agrees with him, but there's always one thing which we use quite a fair bit last year and the year before is that Musk's algorithm framework. I'm not sure you heard about that
Yes.
one, but the first step he's like question everything, right? Because I think
Mm,
background process optimization and automation stuff is like, yeah, you want to automate as much as possible, but you actually take a step back and ask, does this thing need to be automated first, right? Or in your case, like when doing business, does it require, is there a better way to do something versus doing what people think is a traditional way? You know what I mean? Like I had
absolutely.
another client before in the past where I think he took like 3 steps to get an invoice approved by the director of his company. I was like, why does it take 3 steps, right? Can you just like cut through? It's like, oh, because when we bought over the business, that's what they did. So we just kind of followed through without really questioning why they needed 3 steps to get an invoice approved. It's kind of
And
strange, eh?
and isn't that funny? Because a lot of, I work with a lot of different professional service practices as well, like accountants and financial advisors,
Mm.
lawyers. And it's funny because when you see new partners coming through, and do things a certain way, and you go in there and you say, well, why do you do things that way? Well, that's because how the partner that taught me did it. And you go and have a chat to them, and why do you do it that way? And he said, that's how I got taught from the partner that
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
oh, yeah. And I can go back into quite a few generations with some of these larger companies that have been around for 100 years, and nothing's actually really changed that much because they've just been handed the baton, and this is the way that you do it. No one's really questioned why they're doing it that way, or is that even relevant anymore the way they're doing it, or is it the most effective way or most efficient way of doing it? And so
Yeah, yeah.
you sort of when you sort of ask questions, they go, I don't know, that's just how we've always done it around here. And it's like, okay, that comes back to the culture side of things.
Yeah, we can definitely touch base on this one a bit more when it comes to the AI thing, because I think like on a side note, like I've got a friend of mine that we work together sometimes projects. Like he comes up with all those like cool new like tools he can create with Claude or Gemini and stuff, which is amazing. Nothing wrong with that. But sometimes I'm like, okay, what's the main thing we're trying to achieve? You're right. If it's trying to build a tool for fun, it's nothing wrong with that. It's a hobby kind of thing. But if it's not really progressing the project or the business forward, it's like, what's the purpose of this tool? You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
it's like you ask those kind of questions. Of course, it kind of feels like you're shutting down their excitement or the hype, but it's like reality, man. We got something new. This could probably do for the next stage or some other type of fun. Now we focus on the main thing and keep the main thing the main thing.
yeah, absolutely. I said, look, the AI thing now that's the biggest shake-up, isn't it? Because you people are starting to ask questions because everything is being able to done more effectively, more efficient. So, even just simple things, tasks of asking ChatGPT about how to streamline certain things, now you're getting answers, and you're going, "Oh wow!" Like, how easy is it now to start challenging things and actually just having a little bit of information or that can arm you with a different way of doing something or a different process. Or with
Yeah.
AI now, and you've got so many different tools to, streamline, financials or production or so many different, procedural things that you've got now. It makes that business journey so much more exciting. And you can't be left standing still anymore if you're not moving, you're dying. So you're in that age now where if you're not progressing and looking at AI and using AI, then you're going to get left behind pretty quickly.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely touch base on that because I ask you to the next part. But I want to go back to your when you first founded your accounting advisory firm, and then you basically sold it and then transitioned to the global business coaching side of things. There, like, what was it at the time that made you think, for one, you could help businesses actually grow the business by coaching and consulting them? And how was the environment like when people said, "Oh, you're a coach," kind of like, but for business? Because now there's so many coaches out there. There's always a consultant somewhere there. LinkedIn is full of us, including like we all consult to some extent. So like, what was it like back then, and what made you transition to like a coaching business essentially?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In my accountant practice many years ago, when I was working with clients, most of my clients, I guess because of my background with the family business, and I was, so
Mm,
used to that seeing the grind in business and looking at different aspects of the business and seeing leadership and seeing communication, seeing relationships, and seeing the direct, outcomes of, different pricing, packaging, different strategies that you could do inside the business. When I got into accounting and, if you think about most, tax compliant accounting roles, it's pretty historic. You get the numbers, you report on it, you interpret the law and you present some financials, and then you
mm,
give some advice based upon some of those historic data. Um, the frustration for me with accounting was, well, back then I just said, well, this is not accounting as I see it. Accounting as I see it is getting in with the business and doing more consulting. So understanding where the business is going, how it's going to get there, strategic planning, talking about leadership structure, management structures, not tax structures, but management structures, and what effectively helps businesses perform optimally throughout their journey and throughout their stages of business development. And so that was something that was always my modus of operandi. So when I was to meet a client, would always be chit chatting about the business growth and what they're actually doing and what could be done versus historical. This is how you can save tax, or
yeah.
these are the things you can deduct or not deduct. That sort of typical conversation. So I guess I was always a bit different from that perspective. So a lot of my clients came to me in the early stages because of more of what I call that advisory work. And so my sort of lead in was I pick up the advisory, and as an adjunct, I do the compliance versus most accountants grab the compliance and now are trying to do some advisory work. Right. And so for me, I got a bit frustrated with accounting back at that point, and it
Wow.
led to a conversation that I had with somebody. In fact, we're both keynote speaking on an event, and he sort of said, I said to him, "I like what you do," and he sort of said, "I like what you do." And we got chit chatting, and he sort of sort of outlined this coaching opportunity that had been going on in America that wasn't here in Australia from a business coaching point of view. And when I had a look at that, I thought, oh, this is actually fantastic because I can
Mm.
see this industry, you know, you know, building, here in Australia over time. And that was the punt. Would it actually come to Australia or would it not? And so we took
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
punt, and did what we called a hybrid approach, which is what I call not true coaching, which is just asking questions, but it's that hybrid of coaching and consulting. So asking questions where the answers I feel are within somebody to change their mindset, change their way of thinking, change their perspective, and then but also that consulting part, which is okay, this is how you can do it. Here's some
Mm.
frameworks, follow these, and this will get you to a particular outcome. And that blend was very powerful. And I think that for me was a also a unique selling point. And so, back in the day, we went into the industry, we call ourselves business coaches, and everyone would go, "Oh, what's that?" And that
Okay.
would create a conversation because in the past we would be considered management consultants,
Mm.
right? And so now we're going call ourselves business coaches, and just upon that language shift itself, we got known very quickly. And quite cutely, we used to carry around these coloured texts, the Fable Castle 12 coloured texters. That,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
used to be something that used to sort of be our thing. We'd carry those, and instead of turning up with pens and paper, we'd turn up with those and draw pretty pictures and frameworks and models and make things stand out. And we got known pretty quickly around town as the guys with the color texters. And funnily enough, our business absolutely boomed off the back of that. And
So good.
the industry starts to develop, and then now it's quite funny. And now I don't call myself a business coach anymore. I've gone back to a business advisor because the coaching industry now has become so cottage based, and
Yeah,
you've
yeah,
got
yeah.
so many people doing so many things. And there's some great people, and then unfortunately, like any industry, there's some not great people out there. And you're sort of getting to that point now where the industry will probably step in, clean up the industry, much like the financial planning industry happened many, many years ago when that sort of transitioned from the old insurance advisory into more investment advisory. And the same thing will
That's so
happen in
cool.
coaching. Yeah, and so we actually modelled our business off the financial planning industry. How that actually developed, um, and it's followed exactly the same suit, as that particular industry.
Mm.
Yeah, that's where it was. Where it's where it is now. As I said, it's a very fragmented, industry now with all different people doing different things. And I think people are just confused now about the word coaching. Sometimes I think the
Yeah, yeah.
clients are confused about the word coaching.
I think a lot of people look at it as opportunity to make more money on the side, like, there's like, I mean, in all respect, there's some really good, like I said, there's some really good people with like, good coaching abilities, but like now it's like, there's a guy in Australia, I won't say his name, but he teaches, how to become a coach. And he gives you like a similar frame of how to teach those new coaches how to teach more coaches. It
Yeah.
becomes a bit of a, Ponzi thing. I don't know if you want to call it that way, but it's interesting now because like the whole thing's like, oh, you don't like your job. This is opportunity. Become a coach. Uh, Take your experience and then sell that instead. I think that's kind of how it dilutes that experience for some people. Of course, hopefully you got experience like yourself, but it's kind of what we see right now.
Yeah. So in my old business, I used to train the new coaches, coming in, with a number of other people. So, there's there's certain ways you can go about doing that to have a really effective outcome. But yeah, look, I think I know who you're talking about. There's a few other players around there that are doing similar things. Look,
Mm.
it's an interesting landscape at the moment, and I always say to people, be very careful about who you choose, ask questions, get to understand their background, what they've done. It always helps if they've done what you're looking to achieve. Uh, if you're an SME business and the person's come from a
Yeah.
corporate role into coaching, I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm going to say it's going to be very much more difficult to relate to somebody who's at that SME level, at different language, different ways of doing business. Everything is just,
So true.
is different. And so you've got to pick your person, extremely well.
And when you started this coaching thing back in, well, was this early 2000s or like
1990,
2010s? 999. Wow. Okay. I was still
No, I
like
feel
maybe
like a
like six.
dinosaur. Well, I've been in advisory now, through my accounting and coaching. I've been in, business now for 30 years. So,
Mm.
over 30 years, you get to see a lot, and I've worked with a lot, and, smaller businesses, bigger businesses. And, it's an interesting, it's an background that I've had, and an interesting career. It's quite diverse, which is good. And I like that. It keeps it interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So now, once you sold your shares in that coaching business and you started business cut through, is it kind of like a bit more of a small, like you mentioned, a bit more small scale, or is it something different compared to what you did in the past? Like,
Very similar to what I was doing in the past. It's just that I wanted to sort of exit away from the larger business and just move into a, a self-contained one-man operating business while my son. In fact, my main reason why my son was going through school, I wanted to keep my life pretty simple, and
sure,
financially I'm free. So it was a good time to do it, and handpick clients that I want to work with, that I think that I
yeah,
can add the most value to. And that's been it's been a very good formula for me, and two, it's provided me again with a nice lifestyle. I love working, so I love working with people and helping people, and it gives you a way to still contribute and do that. Keeps
yeah. I
my
love
mind
that.
busy, and I
Actually,
like to keep my mind busy. And my son said to me, he said,
really
"Dad, well,
sharp.
why don't you just retire?" And I said, "Well, what am I going to do? I can only play golf so many times a week, and all my
Yeah,
mates are still working anyway. So what's the point?" And look, quite honestly, in all seriousness, I'm one of those people where I'll be 70 and I'll still be working in some format, because I love to keep my mind stimulated, and
I love that.
keep. I think when you've got purpose, you know, you're living a good life. And I think work for me provides, a lot of purpose when you're helping people, and, helping people get to where they want to get to in life, and whether that's business or life in general.
I love that. Actually, I caught up with a gentleman who's 72 this year.
Mm,
Met him at an AI debating event a couple weeks ago. And what's interesting, like, he's super sharp and he actually knows more about AI than most other people in the room who are SMBs in their 40s or 50s, you know?
yeah.
And another guy as well that he works with, also 71 now. The only thing they said to me is like, my mind's so sharp, but my physical body is just slowing down, you know, I think. But it's incredible. Like he said the same thing. Like his daughter, who lives here in Perth, was like, Dad, why don't you just retire? Maybe do something else, do some volunteer work. He's like, I am volunteering, so why not get paid to learn and get paid
Yes.
to help other businesses as well with now this
Mm,
AI thing. He was a property developer and real estate investor, and he's like, oh, this AI
mm,
thing is the next trend because he's seen
yeah.
like the internet boom, and now AI is the next thing right now. So like, why not? So very intriguing. And you wouldn't we look at him with like you wouldn't think, oh, he's 70. He probably looks maybe early 60s, but he
Yeah.
speaks very very sharply still. It's
Yes.
amazing.
Yeah, look, my dad was 83 when he passed, but he was still going to work and rolling up in his suit, and that's just how he was. And I think a part of me is like that too. I don't need to work as hard as he did, but I still want to keep the mind moving. I think it's very important to keep the mind moving, and without purpose, I think purpose gives you fulfillment in things that you're doing in life. It provides you with energy, gives you motivation. And I think if you take purpose away, unless you find purpose in other things, and that might be
Mm,
charitable organizations, but you're still working. As
yeah,
far as I see, you're still doing something. So as far as the old retirement gig goes, yeah, that's probably not for me in its full entirety.
yeah, that's cool. I love that. I love that. Now I
But
want to
speaking
switch
about
gears for a
that,
little bit. Go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, and
Go
speaking
ahead.
about that, I think it's probably a good segment into sort of talking about businesses. And most of the clients I work with, they want to get to that point where they can retire and sell their businesses for a multi-million-dollar sum, and live a good life, or have choices in what they
Yeah,
do, whether that's retire and travel forever today, or continue to work in some capacity. But I think it's probably a good segue into sort of some
I was gonna
conversations
ask
around
that.
business growth and some of the
Yeah, yeah,
stuff that I do. I think one of the things that we've spoken about in the past, and certainly a question I used to get asked, is you grew a business very quickly, won a number of awards. What was the secret of doing that? Or how did you go about doing that in the time frame that you did it? And I said, that's a really interesting question because a lot of people, even though I'm a CPA by profession and I've got a numbers background, people often talk about numbers when it comes to business growth, and achieving, getting to that $1 million and getting that $3 million and then scaling to the $10 million. And that's great. And that conversation is certainly relevant. But, you know, when I talk about businesses, I think there's two drivers to business. And those two
Yeah.
drivers, or two particular skill sets that I call, one is soft skills and one is hard skills. And so the hard skills are the ones that we know pretty well. And that's, strategy and profit and loss and how we price and package and sell things and distribute things and what I call running, it's that running the business sort of skills or technical skills. And then there's the soft skills, which are what I call the human skills: leadership, culture, communication, conflict resolution, things that generally are, beliefs, values, generally things that are more people based. Hence being soft skills. And I think most businesses, when I talk to them, they have this problem. They think on the hard skills side and they go, I want to make more money, or I need to restructure my business, or my pricing is not right, and funnily enough, when I go in there, what I find is completely the opposite. It's never the hard skills that they're lacking. It's actually the soft skills. And because I find the soft skills generally impact what happens in what I call delivery of the hard skills,
Sure.
if that makes sense. So,
Totally.
sometimes when people say to me, I need to restructure my business, and I go in there and go, no, you don't have you don't have a structural problem. You actually have a leadership and culture problem. And
Wow.
until I deal with that, you're just going to keep restructuring your business at every point, just like the corporates do, because they don't solve the actual real problem. And so I think the thing for business owners is understanding what they're really good at and understanding that emotion drives business, and
Mm.
emotion is a soft thing. And it's, you can have the best strategy in the world, but if you have, where does pushback come from strategy? It comes from, people's beliefs, values, thoughts. It comes from the soft side, communication. If they're not communicated well
Mm.
to, they push back on the strategy. And so you can have the best strategy in the world, but unless you can manage people, unless you can manage emotion in a business, then you're really going to struggle on the strategic and that what I call delivery of that hard skill set side. And so in business, when I look at, different stages of business, if I take of this, there's a startup phase and there's a build phase, there's a scale phase, and there's what I call a leverage phase. And between all those phases, there's a couple of brick walls that sit between those phases as well, and what I call investment
Mm.
brick walls. But between those phases is, I guess, a feeling that the business has at each of those steps. And when an entrepreneur or a leader or a business owner feels a certain way, that it affects their decision making. So,
Yeah.
I say feelings affect the way business decisions are made. So I'll give you an example about emotion. So if you've got a residential, if you've got, let's say, a residential property that you lease out, right? And you've got your home and you change your carpet in the residential, in the rental property, how long does it
Mm.
take to make that decision? Pretty quick, right?
Fairly quick. Yeah.
Pretty quick. And what sort of carpet do you put in?
The most practical, best one.
Most practical, most durable, probably the cheapest you can find because it's, to do a job. Now your spouse comes to you and says, we're going to change the carpet in the house. How long does that
Mm.
decision now take? It
Wow.
takes a lot
A very long
longer,
time.
right?
Yeah.
And as a result, what sort of carpet are you going to put in your house?
The one that the wife wants.
Yeah, the most plush, the most
Yeah.
softest, the one that obviously you've got a budget, but the one you can afford and gives you the best outcome. And so there's two scenarios, both got a property, but they're two different decisions that get made. Why? One's
Mm.
an investment decision and one's what I call an emotive decision. Now, the
Mm.
fallacy that most business people think they have when they start a business, that they've got this investment mindset, right? And that their business is an investment decision. And then what I find is completely the opposite. Their business is their baby,
Mm.
right? And so everything about their
So true.
business is an emotional decision. When they hire staff, it's an emotional decision, right? So when they're in that startup phase, that emotion that generally most people have is quite a, they're excited to start a business, but they're also scared, a bit apprehensive. But it's what I call, it's a frantic feeling in that startup phase because there's highs and lows, right? In that first, you talk about those first 5 years in business where most people go out of business, it's because they can't deal with that frantic energy. So, you might make a sale one week and don't make another sale for another 2 weeks. You know how you're feeling? You're feeling crap. And then you make three sales and you're feeling good again. And then you don't make another sale for another 2 weeks. And, it's this whole up and down, up and down.
Yeah, yeah,
At some point, things start to, you fill up your capacity and your business starts to move and you go to an investment decision and then you go into the next phase and now you start to employ staff, right? And then you might have 5 or 6 staff and, now you've got to communicate, right? And so communication is generally pretty easy when the business is that small and culture's, what I call it family culture. Everyone goes, it's a family
mm,
type business when there's a few people. We all go to the pub together on a Friday night, after work for a drink. And, it's all very, very easy, very informal. The systems are quite easy at that stage. And so the business, the feeling then has gone away from franticness and it's gone into what I call more of a relaxed state, still working hard, but you're not as frantic. So you're
yeah.
confident, but you're not frantic. It's a bit more relaxed, right? And so you make decisions differently when you're feeling a bit more relaxed. Because when you're frantic, you're making decisions around cash, right? What you can afford. When you've got some money, you're not, you're making decisions a bit differently now. Maybe it's about what the benefits are, what the features are of whatever it is that you buy. Then you move into sort of a payback period where the business goes bananas and you're making all this money and you're
Mm.
feeling super confident, even euphoric, right? Because you're making so much money that you've ever made before. And how do you think you make decisions then?
You can either go two ways. I think what I've talked to other people is like, yeah, you start splurging more, making
Yeah,
bigger bets
absolutely.
that you can't do, or you start getting to, I'll say like cheap, but you're like, I want to keep as much as possible, but then also it restricts the business or constricts the business a little bit. So I think the first one is the most common one. People just start splurging on stuff without thinking.
Yeah. So, when that business goes through that phase, most people, they could be winning awards and, the business is, feeling hugely successful. A bit of ego comes in. And so, they invest in some things back in the business, maybe a nice new premise, but they also go and buy the brand new BMW. They go and buy the new house, beach house, kids going to private education. All of a sudden, all this money is now flooding out. The business continues to grow. The tax man knocks the door and says, "You might earn $1 million last year. You now owe me 300K." And you've gone, "Well, shit, I spent that. I don't have it for you." And then all of a sudden now the business is growing and you're starting to get frustrated because you've got 10, 15, even 20 more people inside your business. You know, you're now juggling communication, you're juggling sales, you're juggling technical delivery, you're juggling admin, you're juggling HR, accounting, IT, you're juggling strategy. Hopefully, you're juggling all
Yeah.
these balls, and client service. You're dropping balls. You've got this long line of people at your door waiting for you to solve a problem for them. And such is not getting along with such, and they don't want to sit next to each other anymore. And all of a sudden now this thing called culture's gone out of control and you've got subcultures within the business. And you talk about communication now, it's now, all over the place and you need more formal communication. And, systems now, you have the easy systems, Excel spreadsheets and Word docs. And all of a sudden now you need a lot more sophistication in your systems to scale the business. And now all of a sudden your time gets sapped up and your ability to run the business starts to hit a point where I call gets really stressed. And when you get stressed, guess what happens to decision making?
Goes out the window.
It goes out, it slows completely down to the point where it hits what I call another brick wall and it virtually stops. And every
Yes.
successful business goes through this point.
So when people come to you as well, like what point are they at? Because and like I had Ryan Dice on, he said if you're from 0 to 500 to K a year or $1 million a year in revenue, focus on just getting sales, sell something. But like when people come to you at this point where they're stressing out, maybe like with Australia, a lot more like tax systems and everything here as well. I can say that without getting caught by ATO. But like,
how, like, at what point did it come to you to have somebody say, hey man, like you're basically like making wrong decisions. You shouldn't have bought a BMW. You want more cash flow, and now you become the bottleneck yourself. So like how does your coaching and your consulting advisory services jump in there, and how do you help them, especially if they're like yeah, we get Rohan's great. He's got a lot of experience, but my business is different. I'm stressing out. My wife or my partner is upset with me. Like how do you
Yeah.
enter yourself there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So typically, I don't generally work with startups because, as Ryan said, the only thing you need to do then is is put your nose at the grindstone and get out there and sell. And whether that's widgets or customers, clients that you need coming through your door. So you've got to get to the point where you can get to a business that is self perpetuating. And then you start to hire, you've hired a few people and you've now got a business that's actually what I call, you've now got a bit more of a business and not a job, right?
Yeah.
So typically from that point forward, people will come to me. So in those earlier stages of growth, they're going to be looking at things typically like, what's the growth strategy? Are they, have they got the strategy right for where they need to go? My point about understanding this is what skills do you need to get to move from a technician, from a manager to a leader to an entrepreneur? Because most people think they're
Wow.
entrepreneurs because they start a business. That's not an entrepreneur. You just started a business, right? You can call yourself an entrepreneur, but a true
Sure.
entrepreneur is someone who brings deals to the table, who can start and create other businesses and get them up and running, right? So, the technician is generally good at something they do. They're either good at making a product, they're either good at selling a product, they're either good at delivering a product, but they generally have something that they can do that is a skill that they can do that they feel they can do better than anyone else. And that's why they started the business. So, typically if I take my old background in accounting, I was good at talking to people and I knew my tax legislation and knew how to structure companies and trusts and all the rest of it. And so you take that and you become good at that. And then at some stage, you have to learn how to manage people
Yeah.
and become a manager and manage a group of people and get them to, work. You need to work with them. And then at some point, you become the leader of a large group of people. And those skills start to become different again. And not until you sort of get to that point that you really sort of break through and become the entrepreneur, which is you're sort of broken free of that just that even that CEO sort of typical role, where now you're just working on what I call really true strategic, acquisition style work. So you're going out building other businesses, attracting,
Mm.
either complementary businesses, or you're looking at completely other different investment opportunities for the business or for, your family. And you become what I call the entrepreneur. So you've hired a seat back
Yeah.
internally in the business and you're out there building other, bows to your, strings to your bow, I should say, if that makes sense. So, getting to
Totally
that,
makes
I
sense.
call that strategic CEO is really understand. Yes, you need to understand, your numbers and strategy, but I think the majority around is understanding people. What makes people tick? How do you bring culture inside of your business to develop a culture that gets people in line with their purpose, in line with the business purpose, and getting people connected to what I call, they don't necessarily follow you. They follow the purpose. They follow the vision of where the
Mm.
business is going. And you need to be good at articulating that, building that, driving that, motivating people around that, as well as obviously managing some of the day-to-day operations, finances, and people side, capacity side of the business. And so it's
Yeah.
understanding those different skills at different ways. So when I engage in a smaller business, it's more about getting some of those, what I call those hard skills, pricing, packaging, selling,
Mm.
distributing, make all those sorts of things that we need in business, understanding financials. And then as you get more up the ladder, it's more about leadership, communication skills, beliefs, values, conflict resolution, deal negotiation. You start to get more into building high performance teams. What does that look like? And the coaching starts to become more around what I call those softer skills as you get larger in business. And then, I call them management skills. And
Mm.
fundamentally, there's some key management skills that I teach businesses or coach businesses on. And that is, making sure they've got the right vision, making sure they've got the right strategic plan in place and operating plan in place to get to that vision, making sure they've got what I call the right functionality structure in place, the right people doing the right things in the right roles. And I
Yeah.
think there's a good to great, Jim Collins was putting people on the bus and getting the right people on the bus, sort of like that, but having the right structure in place. Then, I talk about sort of leadership culture. So having that right culture, inside your business that develops great leaders within your management team, the coaching down internally inside the business and developing other leaders underneath them. And then I move into sort of that
Wow.
brand positioning, strategic alliances, and what I call funding and succession. So what does that next stage of your business look like? And also internal succession. What does the internal succession of the business look like? So
Yeah.
I sort of they're the
A lot of
major
moving parts.
sort of skills I focus companies on building depth in, which I find really helps them navigate to get to what I call that leveraged business stage, where they're now not running the day-to-day part of the business. They're actually truly, working outside, the old scenario of working on your business side in your business. They're truly working that. They're out there, looking at ways to increase capacity, increase
Mm.
market share, increase brand presence, within the organization itself. And
Oh, that's
that's
yeah,
exciting
that's
work.
good.
And not everybody has those skills. And a part of that is getting an understanding of what do you need to let go of and what skills do you need to bring into the company at what level to enable you to get there in the fastest time? Because we all think that we have these skills.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that actually, because like a lot of times, especially like, people who have like built up skills over the years, they feel like, nobody else can do it. No, no, so I won't say nobody else, but there's going to be very few people that can do it equally or better than I can. I was like, that's awesome. People want to like basically let go. I mean, unless you want to be a workaholic, sure. And that's totally fine. But like you said, most people want to like let go business, sell for a nice pretty penny or at least delegate it so they can have the time back. But like, how do you help like those business owners that you work with, especially the ones that think they know more than anybody they hire, or number two, when things go into like a rabbit hole or into like a downturn because due to like seasons or whatever. What sort of frameworks and mental models do you help them to get them out of their own butt,
Way.
basically?
Yeah. Well, first,
Yeah.
that's a mindset. You got to get a mindset shift first and foremost, because you're dealing with people who like control.
Mm.
So they like, entrepreneurs, business owners get into business because why they want to control their own destiny. So, you know, I think we're controlling by nature in some respects. Running your own business, you want to control something, you want to do something, you want to be better at something, you want to deliver something better. So I think we're controlling by nature people that, tend to get into business. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. But when you get over controlling and you have to touch everything and see everything, well, that's just going to limit your size. And so the first part of that is you've got to shift some beliefs. You've got to shift some, you've got to get a different mindset, a more growth mindset to be able to grow a business to a different level. Because, if you're a perfectionist and which means you need to see everything, then your business is only going to get to a certain point before, you can't physically work more than 7 days a week because you're going to have to see everything. And so at some stage you have to let go knowingly that 80%, 90% of the stuff that goes through the door is okay. And maybe 5 to 10% of the stuff is not going to be okay. And I think as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, you have to get uncomfortable to get comfortable with that notion, because that's reality. You can't control everything, but you can put systems in place and things in place to make sure that that gap is minimal. And I think that's about coaching and mentoring really good leaders
Mm.
inside the business and freeing them up and giving them autonomy then to do the same with the people underneath them. I think many entrepreneurs or many business owners still get it way too heavily involved in that process because they want to shape that process rather than letting someone else do it their way, which is, it's just
Yeah.
different, may get a better outcome. Often I have this conversation with, my son, I've done things a certain way, and as I've mentored him over the years, and he's now running his own business, and he'll come to me with different things, and we'll have a great, healthy debate about different things. And many times I'll turn and go, you know what, you're actually right.
Mm.
You've got to
Healthy.
be able to let go of whatever it is that you sometimes you so heavily believe about something to get a different perspective. And it's great thing about having kids is, I learn more from him now than, than anything else. It's great having those conversations about business and challenging each other and challenging the status quo. And especially now he's growing up with AI, he's now I'm going to him for coaching and mentoring.
James is great. That's interesting though, but I like how you definitely help with the mindset shift because like for me, I wanted to get to some certain deals that where paid ads cannot attract the right clientele. And I to this day I'm still a little like for myself a bit uncomfortable with cold calling. But that's the thing that still works, you know. Yes, you gotta get a lot of like F off, piss off, like no thank yous and everything. Like for certain depending on your market as well. But it's how you get that as well. That's very interesting.
So it's a greatest skill in the world you can learn if you want to run a business. That
Cold
is,
call.
oh, 100%. If you want to start a business, then you have to get comfortable cold calling. If you want to get past just doing, if you don't have the money to run ads and do Facebook and, yes, you can do some non-paid sort of advertising and things like that on some of these platforms, but one of the greatest ways to, get revenue through your door really quickly is through cold calling. So still one of the best ways of getting business through your door. So,
Fair,
um,
fair.
great skill to have. Sales is one of the best skills, life skills, that you can have because, if you can't sell, good luck good in running a business.
Yeah, for me, I definitely enjoyed like cold DMing, the cold emailing, etc. Meeting people, networking, and basically building a very quick sale relationship from there. But cold calling is something I still need to overcome myself. So I'll definitely probably come back to you some other time. But Rohan, I just want to be respectful with time. I do have one more question as before we wrap up. Is now with everything being said, you've seen like things for over like 3 decades now. Like what you see is going to be happening for businesses in Australia currently and maybe in the next 5 years, considering the recession, there's AI now. You've gone through the internet boom as well. Like any final words on that topic for this current season?
I think, the next 5 years in business is, it's going to be a blast. Specifically with AI, I think there's a proponents that AI is going to take my job and it's doom and gloom. I sort of look at it. Yes, there are going to be situations where that is definitely going to happen, but I think you've got to look at how you can use AI to, um, improve what it is that you're doing, improve your service delivery, or improve the way that you develop your products or the way that you manufacture your products. And I think, we're going through an exciting time, and a bit like, it's the old industrial revolution where business fundamentally changed. And I think this is the
Mm,
new, this is that new industrial revolution where fundamentally the way we do business it is going to change. And for me, that's pretty, it's scary and exciting at the same times. And I think, the best thing is not to put your head in the sandbox, is, in the bucket, is, you know, start to learn, you know, start to learn AI, start to do some things with AI and start to talk to people, get some help with it and see what the opportunities are for your business. I think moving forward, I think business, I think my personal belief is the bigger companies are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think it's going to get
mm,
harder for smaller companies, what I call that that small company, to compete with some of these bigger companies in the end. But I think it'll be interesting to see what happens, within certain market segments on what that may look like. Because you're going to also, it is this push for globalization with consultancies and, people working from home, and
mm.
how that's going to look. If you look at the marketplace, there are a lot of acquisitions now of those, what I call those baby boomer type businesses by bigger corporates, that are running them and got bring them up, and that's not a great thing for competition down the track. Good for them, but I don't know if it's, particularly good for, you know you and I running businesses. I think that's going to continue to happen. So I definitely think bigger businesses will become bigger. I think it's it's getting harder and harder to start a business and run a business. It still wouldn't, I still think there's so many opportunities now to do it. It's probably the easiest time now is to start a business from a point of view of there's so much opportunity out there. And there's so much, the
Sustainability.
barriers are so much lower in certain industries to get into where, before there might have been really high barriers of entry to get into a particular type of industry. Now the barriers are a lot lower in a lot of these industries. And so those opportunities are there and they're exciting for people. I think
Mm,
there's positives. There's a few things from a more of a negative that may impact the market, but I'm pretty optimistic about business in the future and what we're doing and where things are going. And I think Australia's in a good space, economically over the next few years, and I think that'll provide good incentives for people to start businesses here in Australia and
mm.
get a crack.
That's awesome, actually. I think in the end of the day is like, no matter what business you start, like I always feel like you got to focus on how to serve your customers better because that's how they keep coming back for like retention and everything. Because I think, like you said, like now with marketing, there's a lot of people now using like AI to do in-house marketing. Software has gone down. The barrier to software and development has gone down as well. I see a lot of people now when it comes to coaching, especially in my online space, while like we were selling digital informed products. Nobody wants to sit on a 500 people Zoom call every week. You're paying $1,000 a month. They want a hyper personalization kind of thing. I think there's a lot of
Absolutely.
different trends happening now.
Mm.
Yeah. But Rohan, this is great. I'll definitely put your link to your website and your details down in the show notes when it's launched. But again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate
Oh,
this
thank you. It's been a
conversation.
pleasure. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for tuning in to the She Fun Show. If you're a business owner who's ready to modernize a business and use AI automation to increase its sales while claiming back their own time, give us a call at www.prosperumdigital.com.au. Don't forget to like and subscribe as we're now on YouTube and give us a follow